Congress, I would just like to say that Billy and the Bill are very disappointed in what you do.
Hey, ladies and gentlemen, we're here to talk about economics, politics, foreign policy, veterans issues, reform the criminal justice system, and drug laws. This channel probably will offend you, but most importantly, this is where socialism comes to die.
Hey, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to talk about Congress, but before we get started, please like, subscribe, share with your friends. Let me know what you think in the comments. If you dislike what I have to say, then let me know in the comments or on social media what you dislike. My social media is posted down in the comments. Or in the discussion. It is the best way to get in touch with me because sometimes I'll lose track of the comments I have coming through on YouTube. I know it's been a while. I've got some new setups going. As you can see, I've expanded the studio. Now I'm really still in the corner of a basement. I just have a better job of the way things are set up now, so that it'll be more standardized and less issues with me fighting with the lights. On to the video. I got some announcements at the end that are pretty cool about Skillshare and Nebula, some stuff that I'm working on. So stick around till the end, but I'll be talking about it in a few other videos. Now, the background for the opening goes back to that School Rock special, I'm Just a Bill, which I've said before that was the first time I remember trying to gain an understanding of how our government worked and how things work. And that continued through as an adult, actually seeing our Congress and the Missouri legislature go through a legislative session. Now, the way government is set up, and this is at the federal and state level, you have the executive, which would be the president, and those he appoints to lead departments. You have the legislature, which is our Congress, the Senate, and the House of Representatives, which is what we'll be talking about today, and the judiciary, which everybody goes straight to the Supreme Court with. And yes, they are a big part of it. They are the ultimate arbitrator of our laws. They are the court of last resort. And all three parts are important, no more so or less so than the other. For our country to survive, all three have to function. And right now, Congress is definitely not functioning. They are not functioning because of so many things. And some of it we're going to talk about, and some of it, I think it's just because they've become so full of themselves, they don't see a reason to care. They don't see a need to, because people keep reelecting them regardless of what they don't do. Now, as I said, the Congress is made up of the Senate, which is 100 members, 2 from each state, and observers from Puerto Rico and the other territories, but they are non-voting members. They are observers. So they can exert influence by talking to their fellow senators that have votes to get things that they think are important passed. You have the House of Representatives, which has 435 members, and that is based on the population of their respective states for how many members they have. With that said, California will have more members than Wyoming. It's because it's based on population. It is the most direct representation of the will of the citizens because they're voted for, or they vote for these representatives to lead the state and go to Washington and do their bidding. With that being said, the Senate has a 6-year term, the House is a 2-year term, which in the House of Representatives, I can see how a 2-year term can be very complicated because you want to get your legislative agenda passed and look out for your constituents, but you're still running for reelection 2 years after you get elected. And with the way the election cycles run now with social media and the 24-hour news cycle, you go into reelection mode almost as soon as you're elected. So I understand why they're somewhat distracted by that, rightly or wrongly. The average, the House and the Senate are both paid $174,000 a year, with the exception of the president of the Senate, the Speaker of the House, and some of those members in leadership roles. They actually make more money. Now, keep that in mind, $174,000 a year, because that's going to come into play when we talk about some other parts of this. As of right now, what I could find, looking at a couple different sources, the average age of a senator in the United States is 62.9 years old. The average age of a representative is 57.6 years old. Although there are certain members, Dianne Feinstein comes to mind because she was one of the first ones I could find along with our current president, who have been in office since before, honestly, my mother was even old enough to vote. So what does that tell you about how out of touch they are? They've been an elected official for longer than my mother has been allowed to vote. And no, my mother is not that old. And I'll clarify something. I'm 49. So I was born in 1972, and Joe Biden and Dianne Feinstein were already in office somewhere. Just think about that, how long they've been an elected official, which to me makes them so out of touch. It's unbelievable. That's like me trying to keep up with everything a 21-year-old is doing today. I'm fairly active on social media. I know how it works. I can use it. In fact, soon I'll be broadening it out and doing some TikTok shorts. It'll be a little bit funnier than the stuff I do on YouTube. Some of the stuff I'm working on with Nebula and with Skillshare are really interesting because I'm also not as limited on Nebula as I am on here. So I'm fairly tech savvy compared to most people my age, but I'm still not in touch with exactly what a 21-year-old is thinking. And I don't know what somebody in Iowa thinks compared to the way people feel in Missouri. So if you take somebody and put them in office and they're removed for 60 years, do you really think they're in touch with anything going on in their home state? I don't care if they go back on weekends, because when they go back on weekends, they live in gated compounds so that the plebes cannot approach them. But these same plebes keep voting for the same people because nobody will stand up and try to primary them, which leads to the problems we have now. As I said in an earlier video, of that 535 members of Congress, over half are millionaires, over half. Over 80% are part of the 1%, which based on salary and other things they have going on, their income is over $400,000 a year. While the average median income in the United States, depending on what source you go to, don't go to one source and then call me a liar, but it's anywhere from $45,000 to $55,000 a year for a family. But the people representing you, over 80% of them make over $400,000 a year. Do you really think they understand what you're going through? Do they really think you understand or how you feel about, yes, you've had a 4.3% raise, but inflation has caused the price of everything to go up by 5.6%. And certain really important household items, especially food, it's gone up even more. That's part of the problem with Congress. And how some of them got there, because most are elected, they're upper middle class, which is low six-figure incomes. And yet, a few years later, in the case of Nancy Pelosi, 40 years later, she's now worth over 200 million. And I understand writing books and speaking engagements and insider trading, because yes, it is true, Congress cannot be investigated for insider trading. The information they get based on bills that are passed, they can use to invest their money and make money. Martha Stewart should have just run for Congress. Then she wouldn't have gotten in trouble. And I'm not against anybody making a buck when they can, as long as it's not at the expense of somebody else. But I'm not for it, especially at the expense of the taxpayer, which is what Congress does. With that said, do I think they're corrupt when they go into this? No. I think 99.9% of people who run for office have a desire to serve their constituents. They want to see the world change for the better. They want to do good things for the people that vote for them. But eventually, at some point, ultimate power corrupts ultimately. And it becomes about power and money as opposed to looking out for the little guy, which is what they're supposed to do. Once they get to a point, probably my estimation from what I've seen in politics, because I've watched it, I mean, really since I was a little kid, is about the 12 to 15 year mark is where it really starts eking in, and it becomes all about power and money. That's it. And that's where we are now, and that's one of our problems. We talked about some of the stats, some of the primary jobs, the Senate. The president appoints people to certain positions in his cabinet, federal judges. That is with the advice and consent of the Senate. And what that breaks down to is these appointees will meet with their respective committees. In the case of judges, it would be the Senate Judiciary Committee. And then the Senate votes on them, whether or not to approve them. Well, the last 3 presidents have had issues getting their appointees approved because then it becomes a game of polarization and sound bites, as opposed to putting people in those positions. The cost of that is to the American people is not having people in positions they need to be in. I may not agree with all of the appointments the current administration made. I wasn't with the last administration either. But for government to function, somebody's got to be in these positions. Somebody's got to be doing this job. And you can put somebody in there in the interim, but the civil servants in those departments are not going to have the same respect for the authority of somebody who's an interim as opposed to somebody who's been approved by the Senate. So how about this? Do your goddamn job. Even if you don't like them, put it to the Senate floor and let it get voted on, because that is your job. Stopping them from getting there is not your job. The House of Representatives, one of the most important things they do, the most important, is to pass a federal budget. Well, they haven't done that in 5.5 years. The reason they haven't done that is because they've been arguing about Build Back Better and this bill and that bill and the other bill. And we're not going to discuss that. So what we're going to do is file either an omnibus spending bill or a continuing resolution. They just did that. They passed a continuing resolution to fund government to this point. Then they'll file another one and another one. Stop. We vote for these people to go up there and do a job. Could you imagine a corporation or your household not having a budget for 5.5 years? 5.5 years. That's 3 administrations that Congress has not passed a federal budget. That's 3 election cycles. Now, the way the session works is next November, we will vote. And in January, the new senators and the House will come in, those that we have elected. That begins a 2-year legislative cycle. There's 2 sessions in every cycle. We're completing the first session this month, and in January, we'll start the second session of this Congress. How about we come up with an amendment that says in the first session of each Congress, they pass a 2-year budget. They're not allowed to do anything else in the House of Representatives until a federal budget is passed. I will use the state of Missouri as an example. And before you say that's not how it works, every state is slightly different. I'm using Missouri because it's the one I'm the most familiar with. So if you're interested in finding out more about how this works, check out your own state's legislature and see how they do it. State of Missouri must have a balanced budget. When they come in every year, every single department will appear in front of their subcommittees and explain their budget. They'll explain what worked. They'll be questioned on what didn't work. If they're requesting more money, they'll justify why they need the money or what new program they want to establish every single year. And by the end of the session, that budget has to be voted on for the entire state. Why can the federal government not do the same thing? And I sat through some of those meetings, and some of those hearings get kind of contentious depending on what the department is. But why can't the federal government do the same? If they passed a 2-year budget, then the first session of every Congress could focus on nothing else but the federal budget. Now, I know things happen. So the exception to that is if there is an emergency and money needs to be spent on something, because the House holds the purse strings to the federal budget. The president only has access to so much money without going to Congress, which I'm 100% okay with if Congress is functioning the way they're supposed to. But if they do a 2-year budget, the first session, they focus on nothing but the federal budget. The emergency exception would be something agreed upon by the president, the senior member of both parties in the Senate, and the senior members of both in the House, both representatives. So that means no matter what party the president is, he still has to depend on Congress to reach across the aisle, shake hands, and say, yes, this is an emergency and we need a solution for it. Well, with the way they're working out, that'll never happen. So they'll focus on the budget the first year. The second year, there may be some little stuff here and there, but for the most part, they'd be focused on re-election. which I think would save the American people a lot of heartache and money. Now, is that going to happen? No, because we spent the last year arguing about Build Back Better, which I still, as I said in another video, I went page by page through Build Back Better. Yes, I tortured myself that way for you, my subscribers. But I actually like reading that stuff. So some of it was actually kind of ridiculous. And if you're really interested in some of the ridiculous stuff I found, let me know in the comments or on social media, and I'll do a video on that specifically, because some of it was just really ridiculous is probably about the best word I could come up with it. Now, with a 2-year budget, we'd actually finally get a federal budget. And the idea of the federal government coming up with a balanced budget, I think at this point is a bridge too far. But I think if they actually sit down and debate the budget and decide reductions in each department and do it the same way, have each federal department come in front of their House committee and explain why they need more money. Prime example, they want to put another $80 million into the IRS to hire, or is it 8 billion? It's an 8 with a lot of zeros, to hire another 80,000 enforcement agents in the IRS. With the hope of, depending on who you listen to, but the Congressional Budget Office, which is what they're supposed to listen to on spending bills, guesses that they will, or estimates they will bring in $160 billion over 10 years by going after the top 1%. And if it's the top 1%, why do you need 80,000 agents to go after them? You don't. They're going to be turned loose on everybody. Your neighbors, the people down the street, your parents, you, your children. That's who they're going to go after. All of us will pay the price for that. I believe in paying my fair share, which is why I believe in a flat tax, because if I pay 20% of my income, my 20% is going to be hella less than Elon Musk's 20%. Let me know what you think in the comments. Like, subscribe. Congress has its issues, but I think they are fixable, and they're fixable by us going out and voting people out that have been there for too long. They're just too far out of touch with the world today and with their constituents. So even if it's somebody like Nancy Pelosi, who's been there forever, if you live in that district, run. Make her show up to debates. Force them to justify what they've done in the past. I do it with my voice here. It may become something else later, but for now, I'll call people out on my small little platform here and on social media. You can do the same. You can run against them. If you don't think you have what it takes, or you don't think you have the money to run for a federal level election, you have school boards, you have town councils. Throw your name in the hat. Put yourself in the arena. Like, subscribe. Let me know in the comments what you think. If you don't like what I have to say, Skillshare. I'm working on a 2-part class on leadership for Skillshare right now in partnership with them. And Nebula, through Curiosity Stream, I'm actually have been approved for a couple different projects. One on the damage caused by Marxism throughout history, and another will be on what's going on with Taiwan and Ukraine. I'm working on those now because through Nebula, I can be a lot more open about what I talk about with less chances of the videos being restricted. So I'll have more information on that to follow, along with the links for you to actually sign up for it. And that will help the channel out greatly and maybe get you some information that you want to get along the way. All right, everybody have a good evening. Thanks for watching.